So thank you all for coming. We arrived to New York City with the car, and in the next 20 minutes, I'll share with you some experiences of first why we decided to test in New York City, and what have we learned and all the challenges, and why are we doing all of this. So we're holding an AV permit from New York State to do AV testing here in New York City and in other boroughs. I would say that using New York as a battle testing for AV is very, very challenging, and I think no wonder we are kind of the first who are really doing in-depth testing in New York, because as you'll see, as I'll show you clips and what's happening here in New York City. While driving, it's really, really challenging, but it's very important. If we want to build something that will scale, we need to be able to drive in challenging places and almost everywhere. We are releasing today, I think as I speak, a 40-minute unedited drive. I'll show you some examples from it, of our car driving in a very interesting route in the city and with very, very challenging scenarios. And we have, it's part of our global footprint of tests. We started in Israel, then Munich, Detroit, New York City now. We have undergoing major tests in Tokyo and in Shanghai and later in Paris. So it's really a global footprint to make sure that we scale properly. So before I get into the subject matter, I just want to kind of give a bird's eye view of where the industry is in autonomous driving and how things are likely to play out. And things change over time. What I'm saying now, I couldn't have said, say, 5 years ago. So things are changing over time. And when you look at autonomous driving at scale, and scale here is important. You cannot build a business if you cannot achieve scale. There are two possible trajectories in which it can scale. And at this point in time, it's very, very difficult to tell which trajectory is going to pan out. The first trajectory is the robotaxi trajectory. This is where companies like Waymo and Argo and Cruise and Aurora are all playing in that trajectory. So kind of the vision of the robotaxi trajectory is that ride-hailing, ride-sharing, using an autonomous car, that means you are removing the driver from the equation, will become ubiquitous. It will start in few cities and then expand, just like, say, Uber expanded very, very quickly to hundreds of cities. It will expand. Since the cost is dramatically lower and it's much safer, then gradually cities will ban private cars to enter into the city, and because calling a ride-hailing, a ride-sharing car, autonomous car is going to be very, very easy, people would not need to buy cars, and it will disrupt the entire private ownership of cars in the future. Kind of when we are looking asymptotically. So this is the robotaxi trajectory. The consumer AV trajectory is different. It says that AV at scale, level 4 at scale, will start with a car that you can buy. Add a certain markup to the car. Say, I'll just throw in a number, $15,000, right? You pay a premium for a car. You sit in the back seat. You press a button. The car will take you to wherever you want to go. You want now to drive. You drive. You want to kind of have your minds off. You can have your minds off. And the car would be able to drive autonomously everywhere. And that trajectory, of course, consumes the robotaxi trajectory, because if you can go and buy on the market autonomous cars, then you can, as a public transport operator or an Uber or Lyft, you can simply purchase those cars and create a ride-hailing or ride-sharing service. So one consumes the other. Now, the difference between those two trajectories is that the consumer AV trajectory requires two additional elements that the robotaxi trajectory does not have. One is cost. You're very, very sensitive for cost. You're talking about the consumer level cost. So if you're selling something for $15,000, the cost should be lower than $5,000. Everything. The sensors, LiDARs, cameras, radars, electronics, the compute, cabling, everything. So cost is one thing, and the second thing is scalability. In the robotaxi case, scalability is something nice to have, but it's not a showstopper if you don't have it. You can start from one city and then go to another city and go to another city. You can have your time in kind of scaling up. When you're talking about a consumer car, you need to be able to drive everywhere. So being able to make sure that your car can drive everywhere, say in the United States, and not only in a certain polygon or geofenced area is very, very critical. Otherwise, you'll not have a consumer AV. So a robotaxi trajectory does not include the consumer AV trajectory. The other way around does. Now, Mobileye is really the only company that has its foot on both camps. Now, we're building our technology in the way that supports scale, especially geographic scale, using our crowdsourced mapping technology, building new sensors such that the entire package, the entire system will be under $5,000 cost to allow us consumer AV. And on the other hand, we have a division building a mobility as a service, building a robotaxi service. This is one of the reasons why we purchased Moovit last year, to enable the customer facing of all the layers above the self-driving system to enable a mobility as a service as a robotaxi. So Mobileye is really the only company who has foot in both trajectories. Okay? So, and this kind of gives a reason why it's important to show that you can scale. And when you're talking about scale, there are two driving forces for scale. One is geographic scalability, being able to provide a high-definition map everywhere on the globe in a very, very efficient and cost-effective manner. And this is our crowdsourced technology that allows us to map the entire world by getting crowdsourced data from cars that have a Mobileye system, in ADAS system, front-facing ADAS system. And second, the fact that you have footprint in many, many different locales, different driving cultures all over the world, as I mentioned, both in the US, outside of the US, in order to test the scalability of the driving policy, the way that the culture of driving. And this is one of the reasons why we chose New York City as one of our next expansion for testing sites, because of the challenges that the city provides. Driving in the city, I don't know how many of you are driving in this city, but it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge. So I'll just show 2 slides about the fundamental of strategy, and then dive into what have we experienced here in New York City. So in order to support those 2 axes, the scale and cost, what differentiates Mobileye's strategy from anyone else is these 4 pillars. The first, that we're also a driving assist company. So the spectrum between driving assist and AV is something that we spend a lot of effort on. The systems that we build for AV, now their subsystems are very, very relevant to the evolution of driving assist and the other way back. So for example, we build, unlike anyone else, we build 2 different subsystems. On one hand, we double down on a camera-only subsystem, and this is what I'm going to show you, what's running here in New York City. It's a car with the 12 cameras, 8 long-range cameras, and 4 parking cameras, powered by 2 of our latest chips, called IQ5. And it provides an end-to-end autonomous driving experience. So we double down on this subsystem. Then we have another subsystem, which has radars and lidars, and also provides a complete end-to-end driving without cameras at all. And then later, we combine the 2 systems. Later, towards the end of this year, we combine the 2 systems into one system where the 2 layers are integrated, radar, lidars, and cameras. Now, this gives us a number of advantages. First, the camera-only subsystem is at the cost level for consumers. So it goes into, it helps to evolve a driving assist. So for example, later this year, we are launching with Geely, a brand called Zeekr, this subsystem, with only cameras, which we call supervision. And all what you are going to see in these clips of New York City is something that's going to go in production later this year, of course, as a level 2 system where the driver is behind the steering wheel. So this allows us to evolve this technology of camera-only subsystem through scale. Because if it's driving assist, we're talking about volume production and not only small fleets. Second, it provides more robustness. You have 2 subsystems, you create more robustness. The second pillar is the way we map the world. Mapping is not a navigation map that we all use. It is understanding every piece of detail of the road. Where are the traffic lights, the association between traffic lights and drivable paths. What are the drivable paths in a city, in an urban setting, the association between them, priority of drivable paths, the location of lanes and boundaries like curbs and so forth at centimeter level detail. This is called a high definition map or an AV map, and we can build it at scale completely automatically using crowdsourced data. This is our REM technology. So for example, New York here is completely mapped using our technology without us sending any single car to do mapping. It's all through crowdsourced data. The third pillar is our safety layer called RSS, Responsibility Sensitive Safety. This is part of worldwide standardization of defining what it means to do careful driving, what are the distances that you need to keep, how you comply with the human judgment of what it means to do a safe driving and put it in a formal setting, in a mathematical model. For example, the IEEE 2846, which is a working group that's chaired by Intel, but contains all the actors in this space, is working on standardizing these kinds of concepts. And this is part of really standardization worldwide, in Europe, in China, and also in the US. And the fourth pillar, when we think about cost and the need for also active sensors like radars and LiDARs, we're also building our own next generation imaging radars and next generation specialized LiDARs, such that together with our cameras and compute and everything, we can reach a level of a cost below $5,000. Okay, so those are the four pillars. This is the supervision. This is just the camera-only subsystem. This is the same car that's driving here in New York. It's going into volume production end of this year with a Mobileye, with a Geely brand called Zeekr. Same sensor configuration of 12 cameras, 2 IQ5. It's going to be launched as a level 2 system, but with the same capability of what you're going to see here in New York. So now, deep dive, let's drill down to New York City. All of this was background to New York City. This is the route. This is a 40-minute unedited drive that is now being posted online. And you see it really cuts across all the interesting areas of the city, including tunnels, unprotected turns, really the heart of the city. So what stands out in New York City? We learned about seven things, and I'll show you some examples. First of all, pedestrians and jaywalking in New York City is really a class of its own. Pedestrians don't respect the rules. When I'm in California or everywhere else in the world, if there is a red light, I don't cross. In New York City, you have to cross, right? Yeah. That's New York City, right? So you have jaywalkers, pedestrians, and you have tons of them. This is one big challenge. Driving behavior. People here are very, I will not say aggressive, I'll say assertive, very, very assertive. And I think because the majority of drivers here are professional drivers, whether they are Uber, Lyft, taxis, and so forth. They are driving because they need to make their living. They don't have time to spend to be polite. So the kind of the culture here is very, very aggressive when the traffic is congested. It's unlike everywhere else in the US, and unlike, people tend to complain about Boston, but New York City is much, much worse in that respect. Night drive, light pollution, right? There is no night here in the city, especially when we're talking about the camera system. Double parking, you have double parking everywhere. And for an AI to understand that this vehicle in front is an obstacle and not just standing in line in a traffic jam is quite a very, very tricky decision to make. And a car driving in New York City needs to make that decision almost every 100 meters or so. What is an obstacle that I need to overtake, and what is a car just standing in a traffic jam and I need to patiently stand behind that car? It's a very, very tricky decision. So these double parking, road users diversity, you have carriages carried by horse, and you have so many different types of road users here beyond pedestrians that it's very, very rich. You don't find this in other cities. Constructions. This city is under construction all the time. Every time you have a construction. Construction is also a very, very challenge for mapping, right? You are mapping an area, and then later, a day after, it's not, many areas are not relevant because there are constructions. How do you deal with the constructions? It's a very big challenge. And then tunnels and bridges. It's also a big challenge. Because if you are, for example, localizing yourself in a map using GPS, you cannot do that in a tunnel. And here, tunnels is a big part of the city. So let's go over each of them. So I'm going to show you examples of those 7 things, but from the car itself. So this is the clip. The bottom, you are going to see that the driver is really not driving, so it's really in autonomous mode. And on the top, we have a GoPro camera on the roof, just that you get an idea of what the system is seeing. Right, so here's pedestrians and jaywalkers and the light pollution at night. So this is one challenge. Another challenge is constructions. You have constructions everywhere, and it's changing rapidly. Look at this very narrow passage that the car needs to navigate through. Now, it's really a huge headache to test here in New York City. This is why it's a very, very big challenge. Here are driving behavior. On top, I'll later refer to it. It's what, under the hood, what the system is doing. But if you look at the bottom, you'd see kind of very aggressive cut in by others, double parking. You'll see in a moment. So now this is double parked. First, the AV needs to make a decision that it's double park, and then needs to maneuver around it, and not that the other cars are giving it any room to breathe. Tunnels and bridges. Here we are in a tunnel. It's also quite tricky. You need to localize yourself in a tunnel. And road users diversity. Here you have a carriage with a horse. Here another. I don't know what this vehicle even is. It's and the city is full of it. This is not kind of an isolated example, a rare example. Really, the city is full of these things. And you see here the horse on the side. Where do you see a horse in the city? I don't know. Okay. So what we have in the 40-minute unedited drive, it's not only that we are showing the fact that the system is on autonomous mode and having a GoPro camera showing the scene. We're also showing under the hood. So again, this is a camera-only system where we are kind of toggling between 3 different computer vision engines. So what you'll see on top is the green is pixel-level coloring of the road. The blue line is where the road edge is. You have bounding boxes around the vehicles. So if we run this, again, this is part of this 40 minutes. You see the traffic lights are being detected. The free space is being detected. See the boundary of this free space is this line. The line is blue on the curb. The line is red when there is a road user behind it. Here's another computer vision engine, and they're all running in parallel, which is a pixel-level segmentation of objects, of road users. And so you saw that. Here is scene segmentation. you see here on the left-hand side, different road edge, elevated barriers, road undercar, and so forth. So every pixel is labeled, and all of these engines are running in parallel to create redundancy. This is another cool engine. It's called a VADAR, visual LiDAR. So the fact that the car has multiple cameras, we can use those multiple cameras to create a depth perception, and use that depth perception as another separate engine. One moment, let me see whether it's running. I'll run it like this. Okay, so this is kind of in real time, the system is building a complete 3D percept, pixel by pixel, and this is also used as an engine for the decision making and perception. Here is another paint type. So there's so many different lane markings on the road, and every one of them is now painted in a different color because the system understands the semantic meaning of each type of a marking on the road. This is also running in parallel. So those are small examples of this 40-minute ride. The 40-minute ride is unedited, with normal speed, so it's not, speed is not accelerated, so that everyone can have a look, very, very detailed look on the kind of the challenges that we have been facing. And this is just the beginning. We have 2 cars here. It will grow to a fleet of about 7 cars in the next few months. And we see New York City, at least for the coming near future, until we gain all the learnings that we want to gain, a very, very important site for AV testing. And for the little that I showed you, it's really, really challenging to be able to drive. I think for a human, it's very, very challenging to drive in New York City, not to mention for a robotic car. So I'll open the floor for question. Anyone who has questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Hi, Joanne.
Hi. Nice to see you. This is a very basic question about New York. I believe there's a state law that's unique to all the other states.
Yeah.
It says you have to have a hand on the wheel, no matter whether your car is autonomous or not. Can you talk about how you were able to get a permit?
No, we went through a process. It was very lengthy. We showed them all the data that we have from our global expansion, especially Munich. Munich, there is a separate independent entity called the TÜV, T-U-V, that really did the compliance testing of all our safety concepts, the hardware, software, for the German to comply with all the German requirements for AV testing in Germany. They're also very, very stringent. I think it made quite a lot of impression, the New York State officials. The fact that we're testing in many, many locales. We shared all the data that we have, and we received a permit. I don't think there's any special about receiving a permit. You simply need to go through this process. I think what is special is that it's very, very difficult to drive here, so it's better to drive in a nice, sunny California city than to do it here. But I think any one of our competitors would want a permit, they'll get a permit.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Do you have to have a police escort? Because I thought that was also part of the rule.
Yeah, that was part. So to receive a permit means that we receive a permit without the need for a police escort.
Okay.
So we are driving here just like any AV testing everywhere else. There's now, once we had that permit, once we receive that permit, we can drive just like we can drive anywhere else. Like we can drive in Phoenix, Arizona, or in San Francisco, or anywhere else where you see AV testing.
Just one last thing. You have 2 cars now. How long have you been testing? And how long do you expect the testing to continue? Does it lead ultimately to deployment in New York City?
Deployment is also a business issue. I believe it will lead to deployment, because I think the demand for mobility in New York City is very, 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 very high. but it's not something that I can commit at this point in time. We began deploying about 6 weeks ago. Deploying testing.
Thank you. I'm curious whether traffic lights is a solved problem. My neighbor has a Model 3 with autonomous capability, and it seems to be a collaborative adventure going through intersections with the Tesla. The Tesla is definitely expecting the driver to indicate whether it's a green light or not, although it will start and it will come to a stop. But what is but for a vehicle like that you're testing with, are intersections with traffic lights a solved problem?
It's a very good question. If you compare, say, the Tesla setup and this car setup, it's almost identical. Right? It's 8 cameras around the car. We're using also the parking cameras. I don't know if Tesla are also using parking cameras as part of their sensor input. Definitely they're using the ultrasonic, I think. But again, it's very, very similar. All this data goes into our computing chip, microprocessors, and output comes, in online driving. So we are facing the same kind of challenges. Just to remind, Mobileye is also building radar and LiDAR layer, and then later they come together. This is kind of different from the Tesla. But both companies are kind of doubling down on computer vision. So now to your question about traffic lights. Traffic lights is really, really challenging because it changes rapidly from territory to territory. Even inside the US, changes a lot. From country to country, it's really a zoo. Sometimes you ask yourself, what were they thinking when they made this kind of construction of traffic lights? So it's a huge scalability issue. And this is one of our advantages also as an ADAS supplier, driving assist supplier, where traffic light detection is also part of many of our new startup production programs. So we have been working on traffic light detection worldwide for the past 5 years. So saying something is a solved problem, it's tricky, but it's in a very, very advanced state. So for example, in the 40-minute unedited drive, which is fully autonomous, there are many traffic lights, and the car, manages them quite well.
In your vehicles, are you anticipating when the lights are going to change? In other words, where you don't have a direct feed, available? Are you using artificial intelligence to determine is it changing?
So I'll tell you what were the challenges really with traffic light. It's not knowing for a specific traffic light whether it's red, green, or yellow. This is not such a difficult problem, and you can do it very, very reliably. The trick is to know what is called relevancy. Say there are 5 traffic lights there, and there are multiple drivable paths. One of them goes straight, another one goes right, another one can go unprotected left. Which traffic light is relevant to what drivable path? This is something that is very, very difficult to understand in real time in a very, very busy environment. And this is one of the things that we collect data into our high definition map. So when we say that we have this crowdsourced technology for building AV maps, one key pillar of this AV map is the location of traffic lights and their drivable path association. It's not only association with drivable path, it's also association with pedestrian walking, cross walking. So that once you arrive to a junction, especially a complicated junction, except road users that you need to detect online, you know everything. And you know everything at a very, very high level of details. And this what gives us the ability to pass through a junction at a very, very high robustness level. Because we kind of know in advance what is happening in this junction besides road users. And then what is left to understand is where are the road users, what they're doing, and so forth. And what is the color of the traffic light? And I said the color of the traffic light is the least of the problems in terms of the technical difficulty.
Since I still have the microphone, I'll ask one more question. The rules for regulating AV development in Europe seem to vary significantly between the UK and the EU, and now Germany seems to have be pursuing its own path. Can you speak to the different regulatory regimes that you're looking at in France, Germany? I'm surprised you're not looking at London as a test location.
Yeah, London would be is on our list as well. The UK are very advanced. The UK Commission is also very advanced. Germany, by far, is the most advanced. They have already enacted the law. But Europe is moving in a fast pace, and nobody talked about China. China is also moving very, very fast. You know, China is not only becoming, it's not only a market, it's also a place where certain technologies are moving very, very fast, and this is definitely an area where you see fast-moving intentions on autonomous driving, AI, and autonomous driving, and regulation is also, complying with the technological evolution. Israel is also in process of enacting laws for autonomous driving. US is more complicated. You know, there's state level, there is federal level, there's the DNA of culture, which
can you
is...
comment on the prospect of AV legislation in the U.S.?
AV legend, I cannot comment on that. It's beyond my pay my pay grade. But I'm optimistic since there are so many actors here in the U.S. You know, it's not only us, it's Waymo, it's Cruise, it's Zoox, it's Argo. That once we see progress outside of the U.S., it will help kind of convergence from a regulatory standpoint also in the U.S. to allow, I would call this regulatory certainty, right? To allow deploying in a kind of a certain manner from a regulatory standpoint. I believe it will happen, and I'm optimistic.
Hi. You mentioned correctly the aggressiveness of road users in New York City. Pedestrians can also be quite aggressive about one concern I would have with an autonomous vehicle is that if the autonomous vehicle takes the safe approach of, oh, there's a jaywalker coming into the street, I'm going to stop now, the street fills up with people crossing in front of you because they've suddenly realized it's safe. How does the car interact with the pedestrian other than simply stopping? Or is that what the car just does? As soon as it sees a pedestrian or a jaywalker, it will simply slow down and stop.
So this is part of this kind of model framework that we have called the RSS that defines how do you engage in this multi-agent game. So the AV is one agent, there are road users, there are pedestrians, and they're all active participants, and how do you engage? So I'll give an example, say, of changing lane. Say you want to change lane in a congested traffic. You turn a turn signal, nothing happens, right? Nobody will even care, right? So what you need to do, you need to start to nudge, right? And you are doing it carefully, right? If you kind of simply go in recklessly, you can create an accident. So you nudge. So, and then there's kind of this framework of what distances you keep such that your nudging is safe from a regulatory standpoint. Same thing with pedestrians. If you simply stand there, and then the pedestrian will continue crossing, and then you'll never move. So you start moving slowly, nudging, basically signaling your intention that you are about to pass, but doing it in a way which you keep distances such that it is safe. Of course, you can think of all sorts of adversarial situations in which the pedestrians know it is an AV and they want to obstruct its movement. What does the AV do? Let's keep this for a different topic. At the moment, it looks okay.
Right. Well, leaving aside active like vandalism of what the car is trying to do, just to mess with it. Right. Finally, in New York, we often have humans directing traffic, often in difference to what the signal might say.
Yeah.
A police officer or a construction worker might tell you to move. How does the car interact with humans directing traffic?
Okay, so the plan is, let's look at the two trajectories, the robotaxi trajectory and the consumer AV. In a robotaxi trajectory, there is a back office. It's called tele-operation. So there's no driver behind the steering wheel, but when the car needs help, there is a human in a back office that has access to the view of what the car sees and can give instructions to the AV. kind of high-level instructions, not, steer the car, but give it high-level instructions. So all what the AV would need to do is to identify the fact that there is something going on that it doesn't understand, like a policeman kind of trying to give it signals or someone signaling to the car, and then this goes to the tele-operator to give instructions to the AV based on a human judgment. The same thing with a consumer AV. Consumer AV has a passenger inside. The passenger has its mind off. So now if the AV all of a sudden gets into a situation in which something is unclear because a policeman is trying to direct a traffic and the AV and the AI doesn't understand it, it can then give signal to the passenger, to the occupant, take your time, but, I need help. Decide what you want to do.
But you wouldn't necessarily have to drive, but you would then
decide,
tell the car to proceed.
To proceed, exactly.
On that point, would you say tele-operation should be a requirement for AVs of any kind?
I don't know if it's in the German law it's a requirement. Right? We plan to launch with a tele-operator. Okay? And I believe all other competitors in the robotaxi space are also, they have a tele-operation and back office component as part of their offering.
And I also wanted to ask you before, I couldn't tell whether you were being provocative or just sort of suggesting something when you had the consumer AV track Tesla and Apple. What are you trying to say there?
Actually, with Apple, nobody knows. But, if they'll come up with a car, it sounds like a consumer car, right? Tesla, we do know. Tesla is very, very clear on the consumer AV, doubling down on computer vision. Whether in the future they'll add other sensors or not, we don't know. But Tesla is definitely on this path of a consumer AV.
Would you also put Super Cruise and Toyota Teammate and I forget what is Nissan ProPilot and all these other...
Yeah, but those are not targeting a level 4, right? So this is the regular driving assist. I'm talking about really level 4 consumer.
Could you talk a little bit more about scalability and your mapping abilities and how that enables scalability? I want to get my head around that more.
So we announced that technology back in 2015. So the idea is very simple. Executing it took quite a while. So the idea is that millions of cars every year on the road have a front-facing camera. And the front-facing camera has a function of preventing accidents, braking before an accident can occur. It's called AEB, or automatic emergency braking, lane keeping, all sorts of functions that require front-facing camera. And in many of those millions of cars being launched every year, there's a Mobileye chip behind that camera. So just to give an idea, 2020. So it was 19.5 million new cars on the road with a Mobileye system behind it. Right? I think to date we are about 88 million. We're approaching, I think by the end of this year, 100 million cars on the road that have a Mobileye chip. So then we told ourselves, well, we can think of this front-facing camera as an intelligent agent. Why not let's start collecting data from what this camera sees, not for the purpose of AEB and lane keeping, but for the purpose of understanding the road, sending it to the cloud, and in the cloud, we kind of will piece all these pieces of data into one integrated high-definition map. The problem is bandwidth. You cannot send, the raw images to the cloud. The bandwidth would not allow. It will be too costly. So we found a way in which we can pack all what we need into a 10 kilobyte per kilometer. So 10 kilobyte per kilometer, if you are driving, say, 20,000 miles a year, it's about 200 megabytes. It's nothing. Sending per year 200 megabytes to the cloud is really almost zero cost. And then we started working with car makers to enable this particular software, this 10 kilobyte per kilometer, to be on every new car. Today, there's more than 1 million cars on the road with this software sending us this 10 kilobyte per kilometer data. Then we embarked on a 5-year journey of taking these very, very low bandwidth pieces of data and automatically piecing them all together and building a high-definition map. And this map now, so now you solve this scalability problem because you have cars all over the world sending you data. You also solved kind of the update problem. Once there's something happens on the road, there are going to be production cars passing through that area and sending you updated data. So once you build a map, you can update it on a very, very high frequent cadence. So this gives us the scalability to go and power AV wherever we want it to drive. This is one of our enabling tools for building sites in so many places. So for example, we'll have a site in Munich. All of Munich is completely mapped without any manual work. Same thing in New York City.
Does that mean that when you're ready to deploy, you can deploy everywhere at once?
Exactly. When you are ready to deploy, you can deploy everywhere at once. We are receiving about 8 million kilometers of data every day, so just to give an idea. And the number of cars sending data is growing every day.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a Japanese journalist from Tokyo, and I think the traffic in New York City is terrible too. Yeah. So you said very, very challenging in your keynote today, and if you give up trying to New York City, it will be easier or cheaper to building up AV system. Do you believe that autonomous driving is suitable even in busy traffic in such as around Times Square?
We are driving around Times Square, so we are driving everywhere in New York City. And if you watch the 40-minute unedited drive, you'll see the car going in places where, for a human driver, it's very, very difficult. We have fleets also in Tokyo. We have already been demonstrating very, very interesting drive to some of our customers, car makers in Tokyo. And I agree with you, Tokyo is also very, very challenging. There are other challenges. It's not the aggressiveness of drivers. There are many, many multi-level roads there that create a very, very big challenge in mapping. So every locale has its challenges. There are more challenging places in the world. Driving in India is something that I don't see us doing in the next decade, right? So I'm not saying that New York City is the most challenging in the world, but if you can conquer New York City, you can conquer Tokyo. Tel Aviv also is also very, very challenging. Then it opens up, very, very big parts of the world to be able to deploy, autonomous driving. If you conquer a very, very simple neighborhood in a very, very simple territory, then it limits your scalability. You have to really be able to test or to battle test in difficult areas.
Thank you. Do you have any request or advice to New Yorkers for your test?
Nobody's going to heed to my advice here in New York. Definitely not drivers. We need to manage with what we have. We're not going to change the DNA of New Yorkers, right? We need to manage with the existing DNA to drive safely in New York City.
Thank you. In a city such as London, where there's fewer personally owned vehicles with congestion charges, do you have fleets and other vehicles where you can get the information if it's not a personally owned vehicle?
Yes, we have. The car sending us data is comprised of two types of. One is production cars, which are personally owned vehicles. This is the 1 million cars, as I said, that are sending us data today, and this is growing rapidly. As we move forward, more and more car makers are giving us the ability to send this data. And then we have an aftermarket unit, which is sold to truck fleets or fleets in general, utility trucks. Those are in the tens of thousands, not in the millions. Taxi drivers. And it also has the same ability of sending us data and has over-the-air updates so that we can update the software that sends this data. And this is also part of our mapping fleet.
I'm driving a BMW 2019 X1, which I'm pretty sure you probably have a camera.
Yeah,
in the windshield.
BMW
Yeah.
is part of those.
As a consumer, will I know that my car is collecting and communicating this data? Is there any point in the purchasing process, which I went through and I don't recall actually myself, but how much awareness does the consumer have that the vehicle's collecting and reporting data?
So all this data collection is GDPR compliant, right? And there's this issue of opt-in, opt-out, and it's all compliant with the GDPR. And it's really anonymous data. It's not sending any data about anyone else. It's just about where are the lanes located, where the traffic lights are located, this kind of information. And it's anonymous.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Amnon.
thank you for coming.